Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue dans un nouvel épisode du podcast Learn to French. Je m'appelle Eden et j'enseigne le français. Hello and welcome to another episode on the Learn to French podcast. If you're new here, my name is Eden and I teach French. In today's episode, I want us to take a closer look into the French subjunctive mood, what we also call le subjonctif en français. If you would like to take a look at the article, make sure to click on the link in the show notes. That way you can also read everything you hear today. So I know that the French subjunctive can seem very scary, especially if you started learning about it. But let's take things slowly. In order to understand things, we need to know what they are. So in order to understand the subjunctive, we need to know what the subjunctive is. So you might think of it as a tense, but the subjunctive is a mood of conjugation, un mode de conjugaison en français. In French conjugation, moods are the way or the setting in which a verb expresses an action or a state. You know, you have verbs of actions and verbs of state. Moods are the category of the conjugation tense. First, you have the moods, and then within those moods, you have what we call the tense. As a beginner or an intermediate learner, you probably have learned some moods already, such as the indicative, l'indicatif, le conditionnel, the conditional, the imperative, l'impératif, the infinitive, l'infinitif, and finally the subjunctive, le subjonctif. These are not all of the moods, but these could be the moods that you've already heard of. The subjunctive, le subjonctif, in French has 4 tenses. So we have le subjonctif présent, le subjonctif passé, le subjonctif imparfait, and le subjonctif plus que parfait. You'll see some examples that I have listed in the article. So for subjonctif présent, you can have que je sois, que tu sois, qu'il soit. For subjonctif passé, que j'ai été, que tu aies été. For subjonctif imparfait, que je fusse, que tu fusses, qu'il fût. Le subjonctif plus que parfait, que j'eusse été, que tu eusses été, etc. For le verbe être. So this is just to give you an example of how they sound like. The most common one of these tenses is, of course, le subjonctif présent, which is probably the first one you've heard of. Why do we use the subjunctive in French? So the subjunctive, le subjonctif, expresses a desired fact, a doubt, or an action that is not certain, or even an obligation. The most important thing to remember is that those facts and those actions are not yet carried out at the time of expression, at the time you're talking about it. So they're not really in the real world, I would say. You might hear sentences like Il faut que j'aille faire les courses. I have to go grocery shopping. J'aimerais qu'il soit plus sympathique. I would like him to be more sympathetic. J'irai à la fête à condition que tu viennes avec moi. I will go to the party as long as you come with me. So there is already something that you probably might have noticed by now, the presence of que in the conjugation of the French subjunctive. Que tu viennes, qu'il soit, or que j'aille. But hold on, it would be too easy if you needed to add the subjunctive after que. This will not mean that every phrase using que plus subject plus verb will require the subjunctive. Sometimes it's going to require simply the indicative. What's important here is the subjunctive presents the fact expressed by the verb as possible, as supposed, or as desired, unlike the indicative which presents it as real. This means that the subjunctive is used with verbs expressing wish, desire, emotion, obligation, doubt, or uncertainty. Of course, there are some expressions that could guide you, and you might know after some expressions you will need to put a subjunctive verb right there. For example, after il faut que, you're going to need to put a subjunctive after that. So feel free to learn the expressions that will use the subjunctive in French. That is also very useful, and you have tons of them online. I'm not here to teach them to you today. I'm here to help you understand why we use that subjunctive mood. So how do we use the different tenses of the French subjunctive? So for subjonctif présent, it expresses an uncertain action not done at the time of expression. So, for example, je ne crois pas qu'il soit à la maison. I don't believe he's at home. So once again, subjonctif présent expresses an uncertain action not done at the time of expression yet. Subjonctif passé expresses a past action, punctual and accomplished. So it's a past action that has been done in the past. It's finished. You don't talk about it anymore. It expresses an uncertain action supposed to have been carried out at the time we speak, supposedly. For example, je ne pense pas qu'il ait eu une bonne note. I don't think he got a good grade. Je ne pense pas qu'il ait eu une bonne note. So when you take a look at it, the principal clause, je ne pense pas, is in the present tense. But we're talking about an action that happened in the past. So, je ne pense pas qu'il ait eu une bonne note. So you're using subjonctif passé here. Subjonctif imparfait expresses a past, unaccomplished action that lasts in time, which is why we're calling it imparfait, but we're not doing a lesson on imparfait here. It's just that it's an ongoing action in the past. The imperfect subjunctive, donc le subjonctif imparfait, is a simple tense that expresses an uncertain action not done at the time the speaker was speaking. So here your principal clause is going to be in the past and not in the present tense, like the two first examples that we've heard. For example, je ne pensais pas qu'il fût marié. I didn't think he was married. So, je ne pensais pas, this is our principal clause, je ne pensais pas, which is in the past, right? Imparfait. And then you're going to use le subjonctif imparfait after that. So the main goal here is to express an action that is uncertain, not realized at the time the speaker was speaking. So it's the past. The next tense is le subjonctif plus que parfait. It expresses the precedence of a past action over another past action. So the past within the past. If you're familiar with plus que parfait, this is going to be easier for you. But if this is the first time you're hearing about plus que parfait, I suggest you quickly take a look at the plus que parfait in French and maybe come back later. Le subjonctif plus que parfait expresses an uncertain action assumed to have taken place at the time the speaker was speaking. So this means it's the past within the past, but we're using subjunctive. So the principal clause is going to be in the past as well. You've probably guessed it. So here's an example. Je doutais qu'il eût terminé l'examen dans les temps. I doubted he would have completed the exam in time. But before you go crazy with all of this, keep in mind that the two last tenses, so le subjonctif imparfait and le subjonctif plus que parfait, are rarely used nowadays, and in spoken French, we never use le subjonctif imparfait or le subjonctif plus que parfait. We use it in either a very, very formal context or in French literature only. The reason why these tenses exist, because they're there, right? And it's probably better for you to know that they exist. And they exist because of something that we call la concordance des temps, so the sequence of tenses. In French, your speech has to stay logical. If you started a sentence with the past tense in your principal clause, the first verb, Then the subordinate clause, the second part of your sentence, should also have a tense that goes along with that concept of past that you have in the beginning of your sentence. So that's why we have what we call la concordance des temps, but that's not what we're going to learn today exactly. Keep in mind that you should most of all remember le subjonctif présent and why not le subjonctif passé. And remember, le subjonctif is not happening in the real world. It's not facts that are real. So how do we form the French subjunctive? So we're going to talk about le subjonctif présent today. And for regular verbs, it's quite simple. You're going to take que and then the verb. Que, je, que, tu, So how do we form the verb? For regular verbs, you're going to take the stem of the verb plus I for je. Donc je, stem, and I directly. Tu, stem, and IS. Il, elle, on, stem, and I. Nous, stem, IONS. Vous, stem, IEZ. Il, elle, stem, ENT. If you're confused, you can always take a look at the table. Everything is written down in the article. But this is for regular verbs. So, for example, we have chanter. Que je chante, que tu chantes, qu'il chante. Que nous chantions, que vous chantiez, qu'il chante. In French, irregular verbs are also a thing. And here are some important irregular verbs that you should remember. Être. Que je sois, que tu sois, qu'il soit, que nous soyons, que vous soyez, qu'il soit. Avoir. Que j'ai, que tu aies, qu'il ait, que nous ayons, que vous ayez, qu'ils aient. Aller. Que j'aille, que tu ailles, qu'il aille, que nous allions, que vous alliez, qu'ils aillent. Vouloir. Que je veuille, que tu veuilles, qu'il veuille. Que nous voulions, que vous vouliez, qu'il veuille. Of course, it's always good to make a separate sheet with the irregular verbs. That way you can learn them as well. And I would suggest to learn them by heart. That way you know them and that's done. So I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. If you have any questions regarding the subjunctive mood, please feel free to let me know. You can send me an email. I'll do my best to respond to you in time. Merci beaucoup d'être resté avec moi aujourd'hui. Don't forget to click on the link in the show notes to read everything. Je vous dis à bientôt pour un nouvel épisode sur Learn to French. Au revoir!